I thank everyone for joining us today. It's just so tremendous to look out and see all of your faces. You know, at the Community Foundation, we have the privilege of working with so many good people who are committed to this region's success. So in addition to our fund holders on the line today, we've got private foundations, civic, corporate leaders, nonprofit leaders, and our elected officials. Each one of you plays such a critical role to ensuring North Texas is strong for the long haul. Many of you were with us in March at our annual luncheon, before the days of COVID, if you can imagine. We look back at that time and we had the opportunity to preview this program that we're going to talk about today. It's called Tarrant To Through. We got such an excellent reception at that program and really a lot of fund holder interest in learning more. So that's what we're here today to do, to figure out how we can take the information that we heard at that meeting, the really tough facts that we heard from Superintendent Scribner and Dr. Giovannini about the challenges we're facing and the current trajectory our students are on. Think about how can we turn that around. As one fund holder, after our annual luncheon the next morning, called up, and he's a longtime champion of Fort Worth. And he said to me, Rose, the status quo is unsustainable, but more importantly, it's unacceptable. And so today we're here to do something about that. The Tarrant To Through Partnership, which you'll hear about, is going to help our students excel academically so that they can become successful participants in this economy. And we're going to do that by fundamentally changing the way we do business. The strategy you're going to hear about today builds on a successful model that was implemented in Tennessee. So a group of us had the opportunity to go out to Tennessee and learn what made it work, the things they wouldn't do again, a lot of incredibly valuable information. In addition to the plan that they had and the strategy, the one point that they kept coming back to was that the key to their success was broad community support from donors, industry leaders, and community volunteers. So that's what we're here today for. We've got the pleasure of hearing from two captains of industry. Matt Rose and Mike Berry are with us to share their perspective on where we stand today and the investments that are going to be critical to getting us on track. There's a lot of good work already underway. We got to build on that and actually now bring it to scale. And we've invited all of you here. As you look around and see each other's faces, you'll see a lot of familiar faces. You are all here because you are essential to this program's success. So today, as you listen to the program, think hard about what it is that you can do to help make Tarrant To Through work for our community. With no further ado, I want to welcome Mike Berry, President of Hillwood, Matt Rose, retired chairman of BNSF Railway, and congratulations, Matt, on the wonderful news about Katie succeeding in that role. Maddie Parker is with us today. She is the new CEO of Cradle to Career. Jay McCall is the director of the T3 program and also serves a dual role as a Rainwater Charitable Foundation program officer. Last but not least, we have Brian Hernandez. He's actually one of the key silver bullets in this program, and he is a college navigator. So with that, Maddie, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rose, and good to see all of you. Some familiar faces. I wish I was with you in person, but this will have to do. I'm going to dive right in to get to our panelists today. And first, I'm going to start by defining the problem. Carla's going to throw two slides up. The first is something some of you may have seen before. The City of Fort Worth did an economic strategic plan in 2017, 2018, and we now know that only 39% of Tarrant County adults possess a post-secondary credential, which is an associate's degree or higher. But you need to compare that to the demand of jobs across North Texas, and that 65% of the jobs in North Texas require a post-secondary credential today. So simply, the supply doesn't meet the demand, and that's why so many high-skilled jobs go unfilled. These are jobs that are living wage and above, wonderful career paths that our citizens can't fill based on a lack of education. Go to that next slide, Bill. And unfortunately, this is a snapshot of what our Tarrant County ISD pipeline looks like. So in the eighth grade cohort in 2009 was about 24,000 students. And when we tracked those students across all the way through to completion after high school and on to college and career, we asked ourselves, how did they do? Well, the reality is pretty stark. So only 23% of our 8th graders ever make it to a 2-year or 4-year credential. And you aggregate that down and look at children who grow up in an economically disadvantaged household, only 14% of our 8th graders ever earn a post-secondary credential. So you can pull those slides down. I'm going to turn to our panelists to talk about the current realities we're facing. The first question goes to Mike Berry. And the question is, Mike, what challenges do major Tarrant County employers currently face in our community?
Thanks, Maddie. I'd like to give you just a very recent data point to, I think, underscore the statistic that you just showed and a lot of the things that we at Hillwood deal with year in, year out. Just for those of you who don't know, Hillwood, my firm, we've been developing the Alliance Texas project now for 30 years, and it's currently at 27,000 acres. We have 525 companies here that employ in the aggregate 65,000 people. So we've had a very unique perspective to watch a microcosm of the economic development growth of North Texas through the Alliance lens. And it's not just an industrial platform. For a lot of people who think of Alliance as an industrial center, it is largely industrial, but we also have a huge financial services ecosystem building here. We have a huge new emerging technology ecosystem with all of the e-commerce and logistics. So we're seeing different segments of the market. But let me just give you this recent set of facts. Every year we host an Alliance job fair. And this year our job fair had to be virtual for obvious reasons. So these numbers may be a little off because of the virtual aspects, but I think they're still pretty compelling. We had 33 employers participate on August the 12th in our Alliance Texas Job Fair. Those 33 companies represented 2,040 job openings across the entire industrial platform of Alliance. We had 1,699 attendees, virtual attendees to the job fair. So you would think, well, that sounds pretty good. 2,000 job openings, 1,700 attendees as of yesterday. And I admit that the virtual reality of what we had to deal with this year probably shows a big gap in the numbers. But even if they're off by 10x, out of those 2,040 job openings and 1,700 attendees, 54 interviews were conducted. And as of yesterday, 2 firm offers were documented. I mean, that kind of tells you. So like I said, let's say it's 100x. Say we're 100x lag because of the virtual data exchange. That's still 200 job positions filled out of 2,040 openings that were posted in the job fair. So, there's a number of reasons for that. You touched on some of them at the outset. I mean, but I think the biggest challenge we have is we've got a qualitative skills gap and we have a quantitative skills gap. And the combination of those two are going to really drag down our growth and our economic advancement if we can't figure out a way to close that gap. So the topic of today and the initiative of T3, I think, is one very, very critical effort to try to close that gap.
Thanks for that, Mike. Matt, I'll turn the same question to you about your perspective on employer challenges across Tarrant County right now, based on some of the data we've talked about.
Okay, so Mike lives in Fort Worth and spoke about the Alliance Corridor. I live in the Alliance Corridor, and I'm going to talk about Fort Worth. How's that? And I'm going to go a little off script, Maddie, but I promise I won't embarrass you. I want to ask everybody a question, a little participation, and don't hit your unmute. You're going to answer virtually. And the question is, what makes a great city? A place that you would love to live in and a place that makes people want to move to. Well, some people say that the simple litmus test of a great city is a city that is growing. And if that's the answer, I think we can all agree that Fort Worth is a rousing success because I think we are now the number 12th largest city in the United States, which is just truly unbelievable. But I think that there's also some other characteristics that make cities great. Things like availability to the arts, affordable housing, access to sporting events, a place where all people feel welcome and free from discrimination and see opportunity to see personal growth, great hospitals and medical care. Sometimes you get fortunate to have great colleges, university, junior colleges, technical colleges. Sometimes you even get a medical school, which Fort Worth has all of these. Jobs that allow people to earn a true living wage that allows them to achieve their personal goals like home ownership. For some, it would include mass transit. Law and order provide safety to its citizens. Low and efficient taxes and reasonable regulations, access to high quality public education, an educated, qualified workforce to work for small, medium, and large companies. So all these are traits that make companies want to grow in a city and other companies to relocate to cities that are working to achieve these types of goals. And Fort Worth is currently striving to make many improvements in many of these areas. But when we look at one question specific relevant today, what makes a company, when a company decides that North Texas is their future home, why do they relocate to Plano or Frisco or Westlake, Texas, or Southlake instead of coming to downtown Fort Worth, or in all fairness, downtown Dallas? One of the major areas of concern is our pre-K to 12th grade education results. You know, in Fort Worth, we have great private schools, and now we're getting some charter schools in the cities, but great cities will provide great results through their public education. The results haven't been for a lack of effort, including some modest effort from yours truly. We have a mayor that's gone above and beyond putting this on her agenda. Most mayors don't put this on their agenda because they don't have all the levers to impact it. And sometimes it's called the third rail of politics. We have a great superintendent who's committed to transformation. We have great philanthropic teams that are spending enormous sums of money and effort to improve the system. But when we think about the 88,000 kids that go to school in the district, many of which are Fort Worth's most disadvantaged, we simply need to redouble our efforts to the community for continuous improvement. You know, there's without a doubt an opportunity inequality in our country and in Tarrant County. And without a doubt, educating our most disadvantaged is one of the major solutions to this issue. Achieving targets such as reading on the third grade level, achieving 8th grade math, and college and career preparedness would be the greatest gift that we could give our children. You know, if we get this right, many of the aspirations that our city has in terms of being a city where people want to live, raise their family, start their business, and move their business to Fort Worth will allow the citizenry of Tarrant County to thrive in their lives. It'll make the growth in our community much more rewarding for all of us, but orders of magnitude more for our most disadvantaged citizens. And it's at the end of the day, that's what we should all be striving for. So when I think about some of the call for actions, it can come in many forms and it'll impact many people differently. But the first thing everybody here is just participating and recognizing and understanding how this education theme impacts our city, because it truly does. Second is get involved. It might be reading a book to someone in our Read Fort Worth reading program, being a part of PTA, PTO, participate with the school board. At the end of the day, this is a governing body. We should all hold Fort Worth accountable, Fort Worth ISD accountable for how the money is spent, but we should all be open to additional funding when it goes to additional teachers in the classroom. And with that, Maddie, I look forward to further questions.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that. It's tough to follow, Jay, but I might now turn to you. When you think about the problems that Mike and Matt outlined about what it means to be a truly great American city, and your work in philanthropy and now launching Tarrant To and Through, how do you think students in Tarrant County are prepared or not prepared to meet the needs of today's workforce?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and Mike and Matt, I really appreciate your comments. I think from our perspective and what we're seeing is the students are not prepared at this point. And I think that's one of the root causes is a lack of investment at the community level into our communities that are the most under-resourced. And these communities have been under-resourced, and these school pyramids have been developed for years. And I think we are now at this critical point where we are seeing the student outcomes, and it's not hyperbole to say that we're in crisis mode when you look at the rate that only 14% of our 8th graders are achieving some sort of post-secondary credential. And so I think while, it's not hyperbole to say it's crisis. I also think that we do have the talent in our city, and that's one of our kind of core beliefs at Rainwater and in the T3 partnership, that we have the talent, and it's our job as a community to develop that talent and connect it to the workforce. And that's really what we're here to do, and what we're really excited about with this opportunity to share with you today.
Thanks for that, Jay. I appreciate it. So our next question, if you think about the crisis that we truly are in, and we all believe, those of us on this panel, and I think all of you on the call believe, it is a community-wide effort. This is not a time to point fingers or cast blame. It's a time to rally together as a community and make a real difference. If you forecast to the future, and Mike, knowing the accomplishments of what you've done at Hillwood and Alliance, if you forecast the future and you think about positions and opportunities, what should we be prepared for, and how do we infuse that into our school systems today to make sure they're prepared for opportunity 10 years from now, 5 years from now, when they make it out of a post-secondary credential?
Well, this is more of a kind of an editorial response versus a factual response, but you've heard my analogy before. But I remember, so, having worked with so many of these companies that I referenced earlier, we see the different skill sets that are required by these employers of today. And we also, because we get to watch the evolution of new products and new businesses, we get to hear and learn about what the needs are for the future. And I think the most important thing we can do is tell these kids what the opportunities are, both near term and long term, and before we worry about what we're going to teach them or what skills we're going to provide, let's just get them fired up about the opportunities. I think so many, I remember growing up in Fort Worth, a big part of my memories of early and middle school are field trips. We went to General Dynamics, now Lockheed. We went to Mrs. Baird's Bakery. We went to Miller Brewing. We went to Bell Helicopter. And many times those were the most memorable, impressionable parts of the early and middle and even secondary high school education, because they expose you to the opportunities that are out there. And, I know we do field trips today, but we don't really do them the same way we used to. And I'm not even advocating that we do more field trips. I'm advocating that industry and business come into the schools and create programs and visuals and explain what's going on in the breadth of our economy, so that these kids start to get excited before they can even begin to build their pathway. So I think that's what's missing. We've done it on the other end of the pipeline here at Alliance for years. We've established a partnership with Tarrant County College, and we put in place the Alliance Opportunity Center, which was a pipeline to feed those seeking opportunities to the opportunities that were here. And then TCC would create and implement skill set training. But the problem with that is that we're on the back end of the pipeline, number one, and number two, there was a lot of remedial work that had to be done before we could even take a kid and teach them the actual skill that they're trying to be hired for. So we've got to push that downstream. And I think that's the goal of this discussion, and that's something that every company in the community needs to engage in my opinion.
And for all three of you, Jay, you can jump in here as well. When you think about the current pipeline and the holes in it between high school, post-secondary, and on to workforce, what do we need to be doing to re-engineer and change our training systems to really provide those experiences that are needed for students? You know, I can tell you in some of the discussion we've had with business leaders most recently, it's been really eye-opening for them to tell you, look, if you could hand me a junior in high school and let me train them, by the time they graduate, I can give them a six-figure job, right? And they are credentialed for the future, and we're missing those opportunities today.
So
I think, Bill, you can probably pull that down for just a minute if you don't mind.
Yeah, Matt, go ahead, Matt. I'm sorry if I jumped in.
No worries. So I think that, you know, we've all seen a move away from what I call the technical educations, the jobs that are out there right now, many of them that Mike referred to. BNSF, we had a program when I was there called Stay on Track, where we'd bring several schools in the north part of Fort Worth. We'd bring them in and just do a field trip, a day of, you know, here's the types of jobs that we have that you don't need to have a college education. If that's not what you want to do, these are the types of salaries that people can make. And I think that reaching in, as Mike mentioned, reaching down into those schools to help these kids see that there is a tremendous opportunity, and that every one of our kids, whether it's in Fort Worth ISD or in Tarrant County, every one of our kids don't need to go to college. And in fact, I think what we're seeing in corporate America is more and more companies are going to be relying less and less on, quote, that 4-year degree. They're going to be providing aptitude tests for people with a GED, and they're going to be training them for technical training, computer systems engineers, telecom, those types of things, where companies are just going to reach around and train people individually. And so I think that there's a great opportunity, but it comes back to the one thing I said earlier. When we look at the stats coming out of Fort Worth ISD, and exactly, these are almost exact same for other big ISDs in our state. If kids can't read on if they're not kindergarten ready, and then if can't read on the 3rd grade level, they're probably not going to be doing math on the 8th grade level, and they're not going to be prepared to go to junior college or technical college, and they're certainly not going to be prepared to go to higher education on a 4-year degree. And I'm sure that we've got people representing the community colleges here, but you know, every time I hear this, those colleges are having to spend more and more time, more and more hours of education going back and training people that should have learned the basics in their 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so we always come back to having to understand, how do we improve that skill set within those school systems? And I think that that's truly the most important thing, because American business, if they have somebody who knows how to read and write, they can train them.
So Jay, I'll turn it to you, and I think Bill's going to pull up the slide that we teased just a moment ago. But when you think about the Tenants of T3 and what we're launching this fall, how are we designed T3 to address all these issues successfully and partner meaningfully with Fort Worth ISD, which is our first and most important partner here, and then of course with Tarrant County College and our other 4-year partner institutions that'll be rolling out in the fall?
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. And so as Bill's pulling up this slide, I think one of the things that we do is try to get back to the root cause and say, okay, we know there's a problem and we laid out the data earlier. And so what does that mean in terms of what levers do we need to pull to affect those outcomes? And I think first and foremost, and Mike and Matt both alluded to this, is we have to put information in the hands of students and families earlier. So this is the reality of the changing economy. This is what it means if you don't have some sort of post-secondary credential in terms of your earning power. And then most importantly, here are all the options that are out there. And I think we've seen in our philanthropic work, and we've seen the data bear out nationally, that when students and families are provided the information early in a way that makes sense to them, oftentimes we see student outcomes improve. And so I think, one of the tenets is we have to close that information gap. We have to put this information in the hands earlier. And that also includes some of our educators and making sure our school systems are better connected to the workforce needs. Secondly, when I think about the expectations gap, and what we mean by that is every student needs to have a plan for after they graduate. And so high school graduation cannot be the end of their education journey. It's a step along the way. And exactly what Matt said is not placing value on a 2-year degree or a 4-year degree, but it is placing value on the idea of you need to have a plan to pursue after you graduate high school. I think the other thing that we're seeing, and this is manifesting itself in our outcomes in our schools, is there's a guidance gap. So if you're a student from a first-gen family who doesn't have a background in earning some sort of post-secondary credential, it's really hard to understand the steps necessary to realize those pathways. And so how can we create better systems and put more resources in schools to allow for that one-on-one advising, guidance, navigation, really starting earlier, all the way back to middle school with students and families. And then finally, it's this idea of creating affordable pathways. And so that we know there's going to be some direct assistance necessary through scholarships, but it's also about connecting students to existing financial aid packages and then helping them realize that there is aid out there and that will allow them to pursue a pathway that leads to a high demand, high wage job. So those are really the root causes, and I think kind of summarizes in a lot of ways the gaps that we're seeing in the workforce and in our student outcomes.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. And as Bill's pulling that down, we have a really unique opportunity today. Many of you probably don't know Brian. Brian Hernandez is one of our senior advisors with the Tarrant To Through Partnership. He has been a TCU College Advising Corps member, graduate of TCU, now working on his master's degree. And he is truly the bright spot in our community. He represents what it means to kind of give back. Brian, I don't want to take your thunder, but if I'm remembering correctly, you were the valedictorian of Polytechnic High School, and now you are serving that same high school as a senior advisor to those students. So introduce yourself to this group, but just talk about what it's like to be both a student and an advisor, and how important your role is to student success to help get them through high school and onto a post-secondary pathway.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for that introduction. Yeah, I try not to toot my own horn a lot, especially when I'm talking to students, but I definitely do feel that I've had an interesting perspective when it comes to this post-secondary work, especially just because I have that unique position in that I am an alumni of the school that I am now serving. So in a way, I've seen both sides of the same coin. But when we're talking about, certain keys to success, or what are some things that might help students on that path to success, especially when it comes to any kind of post-secondary plan. I'll definitely have to say, kind of echoing a little bit of what Jay said earlier, that guidance portion really has a lot to do with it. That guidance and that information gap has a lot to do with it, especially when we're talking about, trying to establish this post-secondary culture early on. So I personally, speaking from a personal standpoint, I was a first-generation student. My father barely finished middle school. My mother got her GED a couple of years ago. So it was a situation where, there are these aspirations for some kind of post-secondary career, something that involves higher education, but there wasn't the information that we needed, to really be confident in the steps that we were taking towards that. Luckily, I myself actually had a college advisor when I went to Polytechnic High School, so I do feel lucky in that aspect. And then she was a fantastic help in determining what I wanted to do. But up until that point, and up until I met that advisor, I knew that there were things that I could potentially do or want to do, in the professional realm, but I had no real guidance or no real way to direct that energy into something that I knew, would result in me being successful one day as an adult. And I find that that's something that tends to crop up over and over again, especially now working as an advisor, with our students. I've met so many students who tell me, hey, Mr. Hernandez, I want to do something with business. And when I ask them, okay, well, have you thought about specifically what with business? And they're like, well, I don't really know. I just know that I like business. So they have this idea, they have this capability, and this interest in these particular fields. But there's just that lack of exposure that really, really, in a way kind of almost hurts them. And so one of the biggest things as an advisor has been, trying to broaden horizons and trying to expand their fields of view and saying, all right, well, you're saying you want to do business. Let's look at a lot of different kinds of options, locally and even, in the post-secondary realm that might be able to fit what, works best for you and also will allow you to be successful. So that guidance portion is really, really important.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. And Jay, I think that was a perfect segue into really talking about the top tenets of what T3 really represents. We didn't clone him, but we have 36 Brians across our high schools serving at Fort Worth ISD and our 6 top high schools. You want to talk about those tenets briefly, Jay, for participants? And as you're thinking about that, Jay, as you're introducing them for Mike and Matt, there are certain elements I know I've talked to both of you about that mattered to you most as to why you were willing to spend time and talent toward this effort. So Jay, you can go first.
All right, thanks, Maddie. Yes, Bill, so if you bring up the program slide, I think that'll help us walk through. So I think at this point, we understand what the problem is. We understand what outcomes we're trying to move. And we've seen from Brian the reality of what happens and how great it can be when things go right. And so our, number one goal in T3 is to boost the number of kids graduating high school that are enrolling in some sort of pathway and that are earning some sort of credential. So everything that we've designed is really on a systems-wide scale to ensure that more students realize that success. So I want to quickly run through so you get an idea of the program. But starting early in middle school, this idea of increased parent and family engagement and connecting those parents with the idea of career and workforce outcomes, I think can be powerful. And so as everyone seeks to figure out what is the best parent engagement strategy and how can we pull the parents into the success of their students, I think one of the elements that T3 is going to be laser focused on is creating that expectation of this journey and this pathway and putting the data in their hands to show the impact that it can have. Secondly is starting early in middle school and really embedding some career and industry exposure coursework into the day-to-day school so that they can start understanding what options are out there, even in middle school, as they transition to high school, that there's already pathways that they can take, whether it's a vocational partnership at Dunbar High School or it's an early college program at O.D. Wyatt. Then once they get into high school, our big bet and our big investment in terms of time and money is this idea of putting additional navigators and college advisors into high school that allow students and families to have regular communication and one-on-one counseling and advising sessions with young adults like Brian. It's also important that these are near peer advisors so that they have the ability to connect with students on their level and really bridge that gap and helping them figure out what they want to do and what steps they need to take. Additionally, we're really excited to announce that the T3 Pledge will be launching this fall. And what that means is every high school student in Fort Worth ISD will have the opportunity to sign the pledge saying they're going to create a pathway for themselves. They're going to graduate. They're going to apply for financial aid. And in exchange for that, T3 will be a backbone funding mechanism to ensure that they have tuition free at Tarrant County Community College. So after they've received all of their aid, if there's still a gap there remaining, T3 will step in and fund that gap for their tuition. We really think it's going to be powerful in instilling a college going culture and helping kids understand that there is an affordable pathway for them to realize some sort of credential. Additionally, we've got to do a better job of connecting our high school students to industry through job shadow and internship opportunities. And so T3 is working with Fort Worth ISD to increase the number of those opportunities and engaging our local business workforce from small businesses to large businesses, but really creating that connection point. The other thing that we're really excited about is putting all of our students on a technology platform and really taking a client management approach to our students. And so that allows us to communicate with every student exactly where they are in terms of being ready for a post-secondary pathway, but also it helps connecting our industry opportunities to them and pushing it out in real time, just like we would do with any other client management tool. Then their senior year, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but this idea of community mentors and engaging our entire community around mentoring students as they transition from high school into their freshman year of college or whichever pathway they choose. It's been incredibly successful in Tennessee, and we're excited about launching that here in Fort Worth. And then once they do enroll in whatever post-secondary option that might be, that scholarship opportunity continues. And then importantly, the idea of persistence coaching. And so we know that students that are coming from a first-gen family that haven't gone to college before absolutely will need support. They'll need access to emergency funds to support them when their car breaks down and they can't get to class. And so we are kind of leveraging that opportunity in partnership with our institutions of higher education. So all of those things are happening. That is where kind of the boots on the ground work is taking place. And again, we're really excited about it. You can see it with Brian in placing that investment back into our schools. So I think that provides a high level programmatic overview. And Maddie, I'll turn it back to you to ask Mike and Matt to weigh in on that.
Thanks, Jay. I appreciate that. I know that's difficult to do in a very short period of time. There's a lot of elements to T3. And for any of you on the call that was too quick for, we could belabor the point for sure, Jay, or either one of us could talk to you more about it. Bill, you can pull that slide down, and we're going to turn it to Matt and Mike. When we've met separately, our entire team, Mike, you were gracious to host a larger roundtable discussion back in January, pre-COVID times when we were in person together. When both of you think about the tenets of T3, why were either one of you willing as business leaders to be involved with this? And importantly, what are you going to push us on in the future to make sure we're fulfilling the promises of our program?
Well, I would Jay, that walk through is outstanding in terms of putting all the pieces together. And Brian, I think, you being living proof of how important this is, that is the most validation we can all have. I would add one thing to your slide, Jay, and maybe it doesn't really fit in one place, but I think there's a real marketing element to this. We want to provide support for these kids, and we want to help walk them through the process and help guide them to the avenues of additional skills development and education they need to get a career path established. But I think you almost have to get them excited first. And so there's a little bit of a show and tell that has to go on here, a digital show and tell. And I envision that when we get really cranking with this program, that there would be, my ideal would be you would walk into a high school building lobby, and the first thing you see is a storefront with a counselor manning the storefront, but in that storefront are a bunch of digital screens with different displays about the jobs of today and the jobs of the future. And you may not think an Amazon fulfillment center is a cool place to work, but there's a whole segment of technology jobs that are needed in an Amazon fulfillment center to manage and program the robots that move everything around, to manage and program the automation systems. There's a Facebook data center opportunity that's unbelievably cool that requires a very high level of code writing and technology knowledge. You know, to kind of go to Matt's roots, we have a GE locomotive factory up here that builds state-of-the-art locomotives. And, you know, what young boy doesn't get excited about trains? So to be able to cover the waterfront visually for these kids and explain to them all the different opportunities that are out there, or at least give them enough to get them excited, I think is critical. And I think that needs to be part of what we're doing. But you know, we're passionate about this because we've seen the gaps that I described earlier, and we know if we want to maintain the growth that Matt talked about, and if we want to take Fort Worth, the central core of Fort Worth, to the next level, and if we want to win those Toyota deals that go to Plano and those other deals that don't come into the core city, partly because they don't believe they can recruit the talent, then we've got to put our money where our mouth is. So last week, Hillwood committed to $150,000 to this program. I hope maybe, Jay, just a little bit of that money will go to that sizzle that I just talked about. But it's more important that we have a lot of Brians out there preaching the gospel and trying to put these kids on a positive path.
Thank you for that, Mike. Appreciate it. Matt, you have anything to add there?
No, I just, again, think that the definition of a great city is a city that cares about their disadvantaged, the most disadvantaged among us. And education is the one thing that can solve this. And Texas is experiencing enormous growth. But the urban cities in Texas are not getting the job done in terms of educating our young kids. And don't for 1 minute think that there's not a correlation of long-term unemployment, long-term violence. You go on and on and on down the list. And they say that, you know, education is always a local issue. Well, it's going to become more and more of a larger issue. It'll be an issue that impacts our state. I mean, if you look at how our state is reflected in the national rankings, it's not very good. You know, we rank about, and somebody will disagree with my facts here, I'm sure, and that's fine. I apologize for that. But we're about 38th worst in the nation in terms of our education in this state. And at some point in time, companies like Toyota or companies like Apple, they just won't come here if they don't think that they can attract that qualified workforce. And the money for a trained workforce will easily pay for our education that we need to put in. I mean, we're 38th in the nation, and we're about 40th in terms of what we pay to educate a child in our state. And we're I'm not saying that we have to, invest the same amount as, number one state in the country is Massachusetts, and it has been for a long time. They have unbelievably great schools, and they're also they're the number one state in terms of performance. They're about the 6th in terms of cost per student, and we don't have to spend. I don't think we have to spend $15,000 a student, but the stats show that an educated person makes over their career about $35,000 more a year than an uneducated person. And that's before you even begin to look at the social costs of providing for people that can't hold a job or not literate enough to get a job. The social cost of that is enormous. And so we can either educate and pay to educate our community, and again, our most disadvantaged, or we can pay the social costs later on. And That's the call to action, I think, that needs to find its way into every leader, including everybody on this call, into this community.
Thank you, Matt. I'll show my Longhorn bias here, my undergraduate alma mater, but I was struck when Admiral McRaven spoke about the greatest national security threat we face as a nation had nothing to do with any experience he had in the military. It had to do with K through 12 education. And I think that that's something we really have to face head on in Fort Worth if we want to continue to be a great American city and be prepared for that growth. You know, when you think about keys to success, Brian and Jay, and I'll let you answer this question pretty quickly as we kind of close into the next phase of case for investment here, but what are the elements, Brian, for you that you absolutely have to help kids be successful? And I know you've helped shape the T3 program a bit, but what are you most excited about having at your fingertips to help students?
Yeah, thank you. I think the biggest, you know, one of the biggest assets that we can, you know, kind of push forward is that near peer model that we are talking about quite a bit. You know, as you know, an individual who I'm relatively young, 24 years old, just graduated college and on my way to graduate with a master's degree, but I'm close enough to the student's age to where they can relate to me, but I'm also not necessarily too close for them to just consider me another peer. And so with that, you know, there's a connection that's established once you start talking to the students that allows them to, you know, ask questions that they may otherwise not ask, you know, other professionals in similar positions. And so, for example, with this T3 initiative, the fact that we are now reducing the student to advisor ratio so much is massive. Whereas before my previous 2 years working, it was one of me working with around 250 seniors. Now it'll be whittled down to, you know, one advisor per every 40, 43, 46 seniors. And, you know, that's a trend that's happening across all of our T3 schools so far. So I just think that being able to establish these connections with these students and, you know, listening to, you know, what particular pathways that they're most open to is one of the biggest, you know, things that we can work with. And the fact that this program is allowing that to happen, I think is absolutely massive. So that's one big thing for me.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Jay, you want to close with anything else there about T3 and program elements there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think particularly for this audience, the key to success will be, can we get community-wide investment at a large scale that's never happened before? If we want different results for our students, then we need to do things differently. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to leverage the workforce community and connect those opportunities and pathways to students. And then, you know, through direct investment, but thought leadership and really just leaning into the work. And so I do think that for this to be successful on the scale that we're talking about, it's going to take each stakeholder in our community understanding their role and having buy-in. And so, you know, that would be kind of my or closing thoughts as I kick it back to you, Maddie.
Okay, thank you. This last section is just about investment. And I think investment, it's important to note, is more than financial. That is absolutely a key tenet. And part of the reason we're talking with you today is how important the financial commitment is from a broad sector of the community, because it can't just come from one entity or one organization. But it's also about your time and your treasure. So what do internships look like at your own companies? How do we create industry partnerships that are meaningful to really change the current trajectory of our K-12 system? And last is about time. And that's on an individual level. What do mentorships and sustained efforts look like? So for Matt and Mike, what do you want to see from a financial commitment from our community? What do you think is necessary? And then what does industry partnership look like to you?
So I'll just frame out again. I don't believe this all comes down to dollars and cents, but I think that there's a certain amount of it. I think that we need more teachers in the classroom. I think we need the best teachers of our community in the Fort Worth ISD classrooms. We have a turnover that's way too high in Fort Worth ISD because a lot of times what they do is they flee to the suburbs. And that may be because there's not enough teachers, or not enough teacher aides, and there's too much chaos, and so they can't teach enough. They're having to deal with discipline, all those various things. But that has to be addressed. We need to find a way to add more teaching capability in the classroom. You know, I mentioned Massachusetts. They spend about $15,000 a year we spend about $10,000 a year in the state. If you multiply that at ISD, that difference, 5,000 times the 88,000 people to go there, that's $440 million a year. Well, just to put that in order of magnitude, Fort Worth ISD's entire budget's $1 billion. But what they spend on education, on teaching alone is about $480 million. So you're thinking about almost doubling. If you were to get to where Massachusetts is, you'd almost have to double the teaching instruction budget, which it's not practical. But through the community, we're going to have to lend them a hand for things like volunteer reading, getting these companies more involved in internships and doing programs that Mike talked about and things like that. And then we're going to have to, and I don't even know if Kent's on this. He and I talk about this all the time. So I'm not talking behind his back, but Kent's going to have to be really hard on other costs to self-fund a lot more teaching hours in the classroom, because the money is just not going to be there to try and achieve the kind of levels that I think that we're going to need. I think that we need to think about things like going deeper into the calendar year for school, elongating out the hours. We need to be at full day pre-K. All those things are expensive, but again, the result of not addressing this issue, the social cost and the social impact pales in comparison to whatever monies have to be reallocated or whatever monies need to be raised additionally to address this issue.
Thanks, Mike. Matt, Mike, anything you want to add there?
I mean, hard to add to that. I agree 100% with everything Matt just said. I guess the only thing I would add to Matt's point about needing more faculty, maybe one approach that could kill two birds with one stone is we get more companies to provide what we use in the higher education world, the adjunct professors. So maybe we create a program where representatives from various companies around the community are coming in and they're teaching one class and they're talking about something that may be applicable to that class, but then they're also talking about career opportunities from their perspective, what they do in their job, what's going on in their industry. So you get, that marketing outreach that I talked about, getting people excited, you get that coming from these adjunct professors who are coming from industry, and that's not a money thing. That's just companies agreeing to commit their people to specific appearances in the classroom. So that's one way to do it. But big picture, we have to get more engagement from the business community in general. We just have to get they're the ones that are hiring the talent that we're producing at the end of the day, and they need to tell our leadership in the educational system, they need to tell them what they need today, what they need 5 and 10 years from now, and really have a seamless communication system built. And neither of those things I talked about cost money. They just cost time and commitment.
Thanks for that, Mike. We're getting close to time, so I'll kind of close us out here, and then we'll turn it over to Laura to facilitate questions. You can tell why we're very fortunate to have Matt Rose and Mike at the table here, helping push us along the way. Mike already mentioned the generosity of Hillwood toward the Tarrant To Through Partnership. We have 2 other partnerships that we get to announce today. The first is with Lockheed Martin, who has generously given us a $75,000 gift along with their push, along with what industry needs to see, and the learning power behind what Lockheed has already done in the K-12 system. And then an incredible gift is coming from JP Morgan National Foundation. And I think David Nolet is still on the call. They're giving Tarrant To Through Partnership $1 million towards this effort, which is truly unprecedented in Tarrant County. And it helps demonstrate where large business can step up. I remember it was 5 or 6 years ago in the mayor's office when I started understanding what new skills at work and the national work that JP Morgan was doing. And so we get to take those dollars and be good stewards to really change outcomes for students, and we're really excited about that. Thank you to our panelists, to Jay and the Rainwater Foundation for talking today. Brian, I think you stole the show. I knew you would. You're a pretty special guy. And like I said, y'all, there are 36 of him, and it's amazing to get to be with those students and hear their stories and their devotion to make a different outcome for Tarrant County students. And then, of course, to Mike and Matt, two very busy individuals that get pulled in a lot of different directions. But your voice speaks volumes to why this effort matters. So appreciate that very much. I'll close by saying, I think it's obvious to you, but all of our economic development efforts, every corporate relocation package we try to put together, every small business effort we try to champion, it will not matter if we do not invest in the talent in Tarrant County today to make sure we have the workforce pipeline tomorrow. It just simply won't happen. You cannot import your way out of this problem. And I know that data tells the current story, but I'm also confident that the tenants and the things we put together in Tarrant To Through Partnership truly will make a difference. We have a talented group of people, some of which have joined us on the call. I know Dr. Rachel Capua is also here, Sam Petty and others. We've been on a Zoom roadshow over the summer. Despite not being in person, we've made incredible progress. And I'm confident that even at the end of this year, we will have real data to demonstrate the change that you've seen. And we will be able to compete with our peer cities in Texas and across the country in a meaningful way and make the tenants of T3 a big part of what makes economic development successful in Tarrant County and Fort Worth. We hope the conversation was enlightening to each of you. It was meant to be hopeful. There's a lot of details here I'm sure that you have questions about. So hopefully we'll get to some of that in the Q&A. And of course, I'd be available to be and talk with any of you.
Thank you, Maddie. I know we were planning to wrap at the hour. Again, Q&A will start. Laura will lead us through the Q&A. But I just want to thank everyone here who's joined us today, particularly our speakers and the T3 team. As you can see, we've got an impressive group here. Brian, you give us all hope. There's no doubt about that. But I really want to stress today that this is a compact. You know, it's critical that we can all see the ways in which we can invest. We have everything we need. We've got the tools and resources that we need for our students and their families to be economically successful. First, we've got the facts, right? We know that what we have today is not, the status quo is not acceptable. We've got the plan. T3 has put it together with Fort Worth ISD, Tarrant Community College, our corporate partners. We've got to have all the right people at the table. And they've put together a really game-changing strategy, I think. The third element that's so critical, we heard about it in last month's call with Tom Luce, persistence. You know, we need to have the persistent application of focused resources over a sustained period of time. We can't get distracted next year. We got to stick with this. And that's why the Community Foundation is here. And we've invited our fund holders to learn about how you can invest for impact here. And so the last element is you. Each one of you are going to be critical to the success. So as donors, corporate leaders, elected officials, it depends on all of us doing what we do best. So whether you've got funding, internships, volunteer time to mentor, smart public policy, and advice. As you can see, this is a work in progress, and we need to hear your good ideas. So as we heard about those corporate commitments that have come in, that's so fantastic, and we thank you all for that. From the community, we're going to have a goal of about $500,000 that we're trying to reach so that this program can be distributed and held by all of us and stay accountable to all of us. It's so important over time. So again, thank you for joining us. And if there's any questions you have, we sent you a deck in advance with a lot more detailed information. If you'd like to talk about it, please call me. Any of the T3 folks that are here, I would be happy to talk about it. We just know this is just going to be a real game changer for our community. So our panelists are going to stick with us. For those who can stay on the line, please do. And I understand we also have Chancellor Giovannini and Superintendent Scribner with us. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura McWhorter to talk about walk us through the Q&A period. Laura?
Thank you,
Thanks,
Rose.
Rose, and a huge thank you to all of our panelists. I'm pleased to report we have had a very active chat box. So I'm going to try to get as many questions in as I possibly can, but I kind of encourage those responding to try to keep it brief so that we can pack in as many questions as possible. So Dr. Scribner, are you on the line still? Because there's been a lot of conversation about Fort Worth ISD, and we actually had a question that was posed before the program, and it was that there's been many investments in programs for Fort Worth ISD that haven't necessarily been successful at addressing these particular issues. So the question is, what is Fort Worth ISD going to do differently in their approach to T3 so that it will be successful?
Well, thank you for that.
Oh, Dr. Scribner, we lost the sound. Maybe mute and unmute. I'm afraid we can't hear you. Okay. No, so why don't we, I'll move on to the next question and maybe we can get your sound going. All right, Dr. Giovannini, Matt mentioned, and maybe you can expand upon, but what challenges does Tarrant County College face when students show up unprepared for post-secondary coursework?
Sure, thank you very much for the opportunity. A good deal of the time students do come academically unprepared, one reason or another, math or English, and that can range from anywhere from 40% of the student body to 60% of the student body, and it's not everything. It's not always English, reading, math. It may be one of those three. So the obvious is it takes them longer to finish college, takes them longer to prepare for college, takes them longer to meet prerequisites for other courses, can eat into their financial aid, and just takes more time. So it's a challenge upon all. I think this is probably one of the most exciting opportunities I've seen in my lifetime. Because it really is, the goal is to eradicate all that with 8th grade careers, with exploration, with high school intentful action to remediate any deficiencies and be ready for either college or the military will be a significant impact all the way around, financially as well as outcome-wise. So. If people think this is just another run-of-the-mill, the latest and greatest idea, that's not it. And what we did do, and what the group has done, when Rose talked about going to Tennessee and looking at other programs, you hear a lot about promise programs around the country, and that's to go to college free. Well, the big mistake made there, and the one we're not making here, is that goal was to get people in college. We want prepared people in college. And so that's a huge, huge difference. And we're very, very happy for the community commitment.
And
thank you.
Can you hear me now, Laura?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And thanks, Jean, for that. I would just like to add that this T3 initiative is different than anything any of us have tried here in Fort Worth. As we know that one sector can't do it all by themselves, and really appreciate the understanding that education and the economy are inextricably linked, and the point that we want to be able to make is that education, in fact, can break that cycle of poverty for a family in just one generation. That's why this experience is so important. Jay's presentation around middle school focus for awareness and exposure, the increased number of counselors and that kind of educational instructional infrastructure to make middle schoolers more aware of the world outside of high school, to prepare high school students for graduation. That's essential. There was a question there. I'll be brief. I know you want to get to some other points. There was a question there about the impact of COVID on all of this, and I have to say it really shines a light on just what we're trying to solve here, which is the disparities that exist not only in terms of student achievement, but in terms of opportunity in our community. We've seen our poverty rates in our community continue to inch higher. When I arrived here in 2016, we were at 77% free and reduced lunch. Today we're 85%. The broadband internet access challenges in many of our economically disadvantaged communities. This Zoom meeting, in fact, would be very difficult to conduct in many of the zip codes in East and Southeast Fort Worth and Northside. Healthcare, food deserts. So all of those issues are impactful. And to Matt's point about investing in teacher quality, that is exactly what needs to happen. Texas right now is near the top in places to conduct business. It's near number 1 and it's near number 40 in child welfare. That is not a formula that is sustainable, and that's what I think T3 really aims to address from a community collective impact perspective.
Well, thank you, Dr. Scrivener. I appreciate it, and I'm so glad we got your sound working.
Thank you.
Jay, I think you wanted to add something real quick.
Yeah, I wanted to respond because I saw so many of the chat messages coming through, and one of our core tenets is absolutely building on the existing work. And so Boys and Girls Club, Catholic Charities, Cristo Rey, there are so many like amazing things happening. And so I think some of the value of T3 is coming in from an infrastructure standpoint in setting up a system to where we can do more of those things for more kids and really reach scale and scalability for the masses. Again, we go back to only 14% of our 8th graders are achieving post-secondary success. And so I just want to acknowledge that and be sensitive to it. I know there's existing like amazing programs out there. And the idea would be as we grow and we find, to make sure that all of those students have an opportunity to have support in some way. And that's kind of some of the value add of the infrastructure behind in the Salesforce technology to say which students are still needing resources and support. So I thought it was important to say that as I was reading those chat messages. So thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jay. So there were also a number of questions around the type of research that was done in other metropolitan areas that are similar to North Texas to see how they're addressing these issues and really to learn from their successful programs. I know we touched on it at the top of the program, but is there anything that you might want to add, or where can you direct people to do a little research and learn about it on their own? And Maddie or Jay, either one of you can take that.
Sure, and we can do several things. I could send you to a few different websites, or what we could do, Laura, it's a great question. I'll send you a few different resources that we've used, most notably, so Rose kicked off and talked about Tennessee Achieves and Tennessee Promise, and a statewide initiative now. They have real metrics to demonstrate what value they've had, and it's worth mentioning, they don't even have the T3 advisor model that we have. So we have that data to share with you from Tennessee Achieves. Some of those resources are actually available at our website, t3partnership.org.
And Maddie, just to add one note there, when we talked to the leader of that program, and she's recognized nationally for the achievements that they've made, she said if she could do anything, she'd start in 7th grade. And that's what we have the incredible opportunity to do here. In Tennessee, they start junior year. So this is the game-changing piece that we are putting into place here. I just wanted to lift that up.
That's well said, Rose, absolutely. Jay, you may want to add anything else to that, but we'll definitely include that, Rose, some information if you choose to send that out to the group, make it easier for them to digest.
Yeah, no, I think we can do that. And then maybe it would be helpful even for us to package a few of those bullet points together and send out to the group. So.
And if I may, Laura, I think that is an essential point. Middle school is crucial. The 2000 and the 8th grade cohort you're looking at from 2009, we really think that this group of middle schoolers will fare much better and have a very different outcome. We know that high school dropouts, I've always said as a former principal and teacher and high school counselor, high school students don't drop out in the 11th grade, they drop out in the 7th grade, they just don't tell anybody. Middle school is when they become disconnected academically, socially, and otherwise. And so I think, again, touching our middle schoolers in a positive way through awareness, exposure, connecting with their families, creating that infrastructure to keep them on the right path is probably one of the most important things that T3 is doing from my perspective.
Great, thank you. So we had a shout out for Brian. Brian, you made quite an impression. The question was, who recruited and trained Brian? We need a lot more Brians.
Yeah, so I work through an organization called the College Advising Corps. It's a national organization, originally started in Chapel Hill, Virginia, and it's run currently by the wonderful Dr. Nicole Hurd. So she had this vision essentially of, trying to help these schools in traditionally, lower income and, minority representing communities. And this vision that she had was essentially to increase post-secondary engagement once these students have, graduated from high school. And, that program started back, I believe, around 15 years ago, and it has expanded greatly. So now there are almost 30 chapters across the entire United States. And the one here in Tarrant County specifically is chapter through Texas Christian University. So it is a national program. We're all out there. There are 4 chapters that serve Texas specifically. There is the Texas Christian University chapter, Texas A&M, UT Austin, and Trinity University. So it's a fantastic program. We're all trained through there. We have the TCU chapter specifically has one of the most intensive training programs, and we go through 6 weeks of training even before school starts. So there's a lot of good work that's done, and our leadership team does a fantastic job of making sure not only that we're trained, but also fitting advisors to fit certain schools. Because as we all know, different schools have different cultures, and so not only is it important to know what we're doing, but also to make sure that the individual matches up well with the school.
Here's one thing I want to add, Laura, and this is what it's so impressed me. Obviously, you've had the opportunity to hear from Brian, but I was concerned that if we were asking a graduate of TCU to actually return into the community, to serve the community, it's wonderful, but I didn't want for us to cut off pathways for Brian to continue to succeed in life. And part of this compact is that the near peers have the opportunity to get their masters while they're doing this work. And so I think that's, again, where parties are coming together to say, what do I have to put on the table to really make this work? Because we need Brian to be have all doors and all paths wide open to him.
Yeah, I would just add, Rose, so the T3 Advisory Council, we did a national search to find who is doing college advising in the schools in a way that makes sense and that's the best, and that has an infrastructure to be able to hire 30 additional advisors in 1 year. And that model of being able to recruit recent college graduates to go back into the school, but also receive their masters, is a huge partnership with TCU. And so I just want to say thank you to them for also taking on this commitment. And they are certainly a huge component of this program.
Great. Okay, Mike, I have one for you. You really caught everyone's attention at the top of our program when you were talking about the job fair and the fact out of 1,700 attendees that only 54 job interviews materialized and led to 2 offers. So just curious, what specific skills or what are the things that are so deficient with our current candidate pool in our area?
I mean, I hate to say this, but I think it touches all sectors. That particular job fair, I looked at all the postings, and quite frankly, I would say 80% of the postings were lower level positions. So, fulfillment and logistics and warehouse type positions, but there were some tech positions. I mentioned earlier the robotics and some of the things that are used now in these fulfillment centers. So that particular job fair, I think, was shockingly negative because you weren't trying to fill. It wasn't like it was Google trying to hire 1,000, software programmers. However, I will tell you that I do have conversations quite a bit with our financial services community and with the tech community. We're in the midst of standing up a mobility innovation zone, which is truly a kind of a new tech strategy for Fort Worth. The mayor's been very supportive of it. It kind of plays into the broader innovation strategy that Fort Worth has for their overall economic development program. Our effort is focused specifically on autonomous freight movement, both on the surface and in the air. So it's very systems and technology driven. And we've had 3 of our early stage prospects in that initiative have decided either to forego moving here and stay in Silicon Valley, or in the case of 2, they've gone to Austin because their view, and the quantitative data backs it up, is that we don't really have the pool of quote unquote tech talent that they feel they'll need to be successful here. Plus, it's a recruiting issue. Matt talked about it earlier at the very beginning, but it's kind of back to I keep pounding the rock on marketing, but this whole, you gotta package your story. You gotta be real. You gotta be able to deliver, but you gotta package your story as well. And we do a terrible job in that arena. So, we're never gonna recruit those companies, thus be able to create the talent pipeline that we're talking about if we don't really have a story to tell and get out there and tell it. So yeah, I think we've got to focus on all segments of the economy right now in terms of this initiative. We can't just be geared towards one or the one segment over the other.
Thanks, Mike, and gosh.
But one other point, you got to be strategic, and you got to look at our economy today, look at the evolution of it, and we got to take care of who's here. So we got to train to the Lockheeds and the Bells and the BNSFs and the others, but we also need to begin to train to where we think the jobs are going to be 5 and 10 years from now. So it's a multi-pronged challenge.
Yeah, gosh, Mike, we sure appreciate your insight on that. So the next question, I'm going to toss it out to the panel and see who wants to answer, but it's post-college graduation. What do graduates do to try to find a career so as to entice them to stay local and not seek careers elsewhere?
Yeah, I'll speak on behalf of TCU. I mean, the vast majority, TCU's used to be 85% from the state of Texas. It's down to less than 50 today. And the number 1 school outside of Texas is California. Number 2 school is Missouri, specifically Kansas City. So we have kids from all over the world, all over the country. They're moving in here. And at least the kids in the business school, they want to stay here. And what we don't have is we don't have the big corporate presence that somebody like in North Dallas has. I mean, we've kind of dwindled away our big corporate presence in Fort Worth. I mean, Radio Shack is used to be an iconic brand. Pier 1, XTO moved away. We've had other companies that just have left, and so a lot of kids that come out of college, they want to go work in a big corporate setting, and we have very few corporations for being the 12th largest city in this entire country. So it gets back to providing an environment that corporations want to come, they want to relocate here. We've got to have the educated workforce. Mike talked about it. I would challenge you, if you ran an ad today for 25 systems programmers paying them $150,000 a year, you'd get very little response, because systems programmers don't want to live in Fort Worth, Texas. I mentioned, the word diversity and free of discrimination nation in my comments, and Fort Worth is I love it, but it's not always viewed as a community for all citizens in our country. And those systems engineers, they're going to be in Austin, Texas. They're going to be in Richardson, Texas, and finding people to staff those jobs it's not going to just be, well, we've got these jobs and we're willing to pay people. We're going to have to change our approach on how we retain people in this community.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask kind of a summary question to wrap us up. So it was referenced that there is a transportation issue, and there was discussion on some solution for that. But in the chat box, there was a discussion on also the housing problem that many of our students face. So there are so many underlying determinants to success. How is T3 going to work and try to address some of those to increase students' ability to be successful?
So I'll take part of that first, Laura. I would say the number one thing we're doing is those 36 navigators in the school, because those 36 individuals can be focused on this career navigation, college career navigation, to help students focus there, which also frees up time for your very hardworking counseling staff that are in these campuses that up to now have been very overwhelmed, and allow them to resource and spend their time working on a lot of those social emotional needs of the entire family. And then Jay also alluded to this, of what Tarrant To Through is really working on, and then myself as CEO of Cradle to Career, creating a real connection point that understands all the different resources that are available for all families in Tarrant County, and importantly for students, to make sure we're resourcing them. I can't tell you how often in my years of public service I have run across families that had a basic need. They just didn't know where to look. And despite really well-intentioned systems, we just have to be better. And I know that I look forward to working personally with folks like Leah King at United Way, Boys and Girls Club, I could go on and on, Girls Inc., to understand what the needs of all these students really are and their entire family, because we do have to have a whole family approach to really intervene in a meaningful way and change that generational poverty that's faced a lot of these families in specific zip codes across Tarrant County. And there are other program tenants. The last one I mentioned is an emergency fund. So beginning of that year, those students move on from high school into post-secondary, create an emergency fund that these students can apply to. So when they do get that flat tire, it's not the end all be all to make them drop out. And then I know Councilwoman Zeta, I would expect nothing less. Before she got off, she mentioned transit and the critical importance there. That is an important partnership. So just asking those basic questions and awareness of what's available to different families. And transit is an important part of the conversation. And I know our community is really looking at what the future transit system looks like.
Thank you, Maddie. And I do want to mention a lot of wonderful programs were lifted up. The Dan Deipert's Career Center and Technical Center. Dan and Linda are fund holders of ours. Great center. Azle ISD, Crowley ISD. So there is a lot of good work that is happening out there. So the last and final question that I want you just to very briefly, each of you, touch on is, what does success look like to you? Maddie, I'll start with you.
I think I'll start with our mantra that student success is our success. If everybody in this community really believes that and works towards that goal, we will be successful. And we have to believe it every day that every child, regardless of zip code and background, deserves a quality opportunity towards an education. And I do believe that if we're all kind of focused in that motion, we don't have to be perfect to get in the way of progress, but I know we'll get there.
Thank you, Maddie. How about you, Mike? What does success look like to you?
Sorry. I think early success would be if we could engage a significant portion of the business community, the local business community, both with their checkbooks and with their human talent and human resources. That would be, that's it, in my mind, that's where it's got to start. I mean, everything else will start to fall in place if a broad cross section of the business community will buy into this and truly get involved. I think then the other pieces on Jay's milestone pipeline and his chronological pathway slide will start to happen. So that would be what I'd like to see.
Great. Matt?
Yeah, I'm sticking with Kent Scribner's goals: early literacy, mid-school math, and preparedness for college or technical training.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I feel like I'm running out of things to say. No, but you know, a lot of the similar things that everyone else has said. You know, just knowing, having that confidence and knowing that once a student graduates, they not only know where they're at least trying to go, but have the skill set to be able to back up and at least start that journey of where they're going wherever they go. So, student success is always going to be number one.
Thank you. And then Jay, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Rose.
Laura, I love this question. You're like getting me excited to answer it. So success to me is very tangible. And that's one of the reasons I think that Rainwater is so excited about this program. The ROI is there. And so to me, success looks like in this first year, we need like 5% more students enrolling in a post-secondary option. And then it moves on, and we need 5% more that are actually earning some sort of post-secondary credentials in the years out. And if we can sustain that continuous improvement over time, like Matt said, that's for every student, that's $35,000 on average annually per year coming back to that student, which is taxpayers. And so like to me, the success of this program is very tangible. We will know in 8 or 9 months how many students are enrolling in post-secondary. So there's plenty of interim, measures, but it's very tangible and real world objective measures that we're going to be looking at and course correcting and moving. So I hope that gives some level of, assurance that how seriously we are taking the success of this program and any investments made in the program.
Well, fantastic. And thank you to all our guests for all of your wonderful questions. Rose, why don't you close us out?
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you again to everyone for being with us. I've never been more excited about an opportunity, and we're going to do this. We need you, and please let me know how I can make the case to you all individually, because this is going to be the game changer for our community.